episode number 324 of the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. Welcome to the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. On today's episode, I'm going to be talking about a topic that I've talked about before, but it's a little different. And I am going to be discussing stress and its impact on fertility. Now, I've spoken about stress before. We've had many different episodes talking about how stress can impact fertility. And I know a lot of people say, oh, does it really impact fertility? Yes, when it gets broken down, absolutely. And indirectly in some ways. So today I'm actually going to be talking about the gut-brain connection, how stress can impact the gut and how the gut is super important for fertility health. So stay tuned. Welcome to the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. I'm Michelle, a fertility acupuncturist here to provide you with resources on how to create a wholesome approach to your fertility journey. So I find this topic actually really fascinating because the gut is super smart, actually. It has its own nervous system, and it's really fascinating just how it runs. And I tend to be really fascinated by the nervous system as it is. And I think that the nervous system is one of the things that we don't really pay that much attention to, but it really does make a difference on so many factors, on so many things in our body. And really, it makes such a difference and influence on how we feel in our life and how we perceive the world as well. And if you really think about the influence of stress on the nervous system, then you can see how it really is such a direct relationship. Stress is really how our nervous system reacts and responds to the life around us. Now, I always say this, I've said this before, and I'm going to say this today again, is that it's not about eliminating stress or eradicating stress. As a matter of fact, stress can actually make us stronger. So having moments of stress, if you think about going to the gym and building muscle, one of the reasons why we get stronger is because of the stress, and stress can also impact the bones and help the bones. So having that extra stress actually strengthens the bones. So stress can actually be something that can be alchemized to help our bodies, to help our life. Like if you have difficulties or challenges in your life, you'll find that it actually makes you stronger. And it makes you smarter, and it gets you to think about things differently than you would have normally. And if you don't have that element of stress, then you don't really have that opportunity of growth. So stress is incredibly advantageous when it is not chronic, when it's not all the time. And we as humans, and this is really like even how we learn about the body through Chinese medicine, is that a lot of things in our bodies and a lot of things in nature run in pulses. It runs in rhythms. So when you have something all the time without that break, that's when it can lead to imbalance. So when you have like pulses of stress or things that come and go, that is when the body is able to have the pulse, and then it goes back into a more yin phase. I've spoken about the yin and the yang, which are really two opposing opposites that need each other in order to create harmony and balance. And that harmony and balance is something that conventional medicine will say or call homeostasis. And homeostasis is basically a state that the body always strives for in order to thrive. And that is the ultimate. So homeostasis is that balance that keeps us in check. It keeps the hormones in check. It keeps everything in check. Now, in order to have that, we can't have too much yang or too much yin. We need the two, and this is how we have a pulse. A pulse is something that goes back and forth. And that back and forth is what keeps things in balance. So it can go back and forth, but then eventually grow into strength. So having that stress, but then having that recovery, and that combination of the two is what actually gets us stronger. However, many cases, our nervous system is hyper-stimulated, hyper meaning over. So overstimulated by electronics, by sound, by things that are typically not occurring in nature if we were to be living really in accordance with nature. And what we used to do in the past when we didn't have all these man-made things like light at night or really loud noises from the garbage truck, things that are really not something that you find in nature, sounds that you don't really hear in nature, bright lights that you don't see in nature, things that are not typical to what our bodies are actually programmed to be used to and also to understand and process. So when we have that extreme hyperstimulation all the time, and now I'm not even talking about the emotional stress, I'm just talking about the stressors that we are exposed to day in and day out that also stimulate our nervous system. And by stimulating it all the time, it actually weakens it. It makes you more tired. So in Chinese medicine, we talk about excess and deficiency, and that's kind of like the yin and the yang. And when we have too much excess, it can lead to deficiency because the body has to process that excess. And when there's just too much coming at it at once, it can make it more deficient. Just think about a computer. If you're throwing in so many different software and really loading it up, over time it's going to get slower and it's going to get in the way of its ability to process signals, and it takes a little longer to do things. So now that we covered that aspect of stress, there's also emotional stress. And if you notice, emotions actually take a lot of energy in the body. And so having that stress chronically of emotions, that drains the body of reserves, and it can also impact how we feel and impact the state of our brains. And it also has been shown to create a more incoherent state of brainwaves. And that's been studied and observed in HeartMath Institute, where they study the heart-brain coherence. And it's really, really fascinating work because they're actually seeing that there's a relationship between the heart and the brain. And the heart has always been, in Chinese medicine, said to house the brain, which is interesting because nobody really understood from a conventional medicine perspective what that really meant. Or it was kind of like, okay, well, that's, I guess, their perspective on it or their theory. But now science is actually showing that that is really, in fact, true. And as a matter of fact, the heart acts as a brain, and it can really pick up on things before the brain even picks up on them. So your heart is, in a sense, even more powerful than the brain itself. Now, when it comes to the brain and stressors and impacts of the stressors on the brain, that can impact a fight and flight response from your body. So we know one thing that's really fascinating is that there's a bidirectional relationship between the brain and your gut. So your gut has its own nervous system, and it's called the enteric nervous system. And your brain is connected to the central nervous system, and that central nervous system gets information from the brain, and it also receives information from the body. So how that is connected to the gut is through the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve is kind of like playing operator, and it has a bidirectional communication pathway from the enteric nervous system, which is our gut nervous system, and that basically runs from your mouth to your anus. So basically it runs throughout the whole thing, and it has hundreds of thousands of neurons. And that is pretty fascinating. But the fascinating thing is that it is connected via the vagus nerve to your brain, and your brain connects with your gut. So when you have stressors that are impacting the integrity of the way your brain is functioning, when there are too many difficulties, incoherences, and dysfunctional stressors that can impact your nervous system and also impact you to be more in a fight or flight state, then that can impact your gut health as well. So when the vagus nerve is activated, the vagus nerve can get you into a more rest and digest state. And that rest and digest state is optimal for your digestive system. And that is what you want. You want your body to be in a state of where fluids can flow freely, because you'll find that if you are in a fight or flight state, your mouth gets really dry. It's like the fluids get like dried up. And what happens is in those situations where your body perceives a danger, it knows that it can't focus on anything else but the ability to run or to fight if you can't run. So what happens is your body automatically will start to send blood to the arms and to the legs and away from your organs. So that, where does that move away from? It moves away from your heart. It moves away from your liver. It moves away from all your internal organs, moves away from your digestion. It moves away from your uterus and your ovaries. And to have yourself be in a state that is chronically like that, it's going to impact how your body is going to nourish itself and regenerate. And that, of course, is going to impact your fertility health. So yes, stress can really, really impact fertility health. But a very big reason for why is also because it impacts your gut health. And your gut health is central to your fertility health. It can impact how your body is able to process nutrients, how your body is able to get energy, how your body deals with inflammation, and how your body's immune system operates. All things that contribute greatly to your fertility health. And it also impacts your body's microbiome, not just the gut microbiome, but it can also influence your vaginal microbiome and your uterine microbiome. So it can impact so many things, and it's such a trickle effect. And that's the thing with the body that is so amazing, but also can be challenging for sometimes conventional medicine to approach, because if you take pieces of the body or parts of the body and just focus on that part, you're just not going to get the full picture. And this is why I love Chinese medicine, is because it looks at the full circle, the full picture, and how all the different parts work together. And it's like a big, huge web that intercommunicates with each other. So when you start to realize that, you don't need to really figure it out all together. And that's a thing that I do want to stress in this, no pun intended. But I do want to mention that ultimately, all the things that I'm telling you is really to give you a big picture about it, but you don't have to figure out exactly how it works. It's really more an understanding of really what stress can do to your gut. The reason I say this is because your body's actually really intelligent and your body knows what to do. So when you get it to a state where you regulate your nervous system, and I'm going to be sharing things and to-dos towards the end of this, so you can keep listening to find out. But when you do get yourself to that state, then your body knows exactly what it needs to do. You don't have to figure it out, and you don't even have to tell the body what to do. The body already knows what to do. All it needs is an environment that feels safe for it to do so. Another thing to note is that the brain not only impacts the gut, but the gut can also impact the brain. So the gut can also impact our ability to produce serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter that impacts your mood and overall well-being. So if you have any kind of issues with your gut, it can also impact the brain, and that can create more stress. So it's bi-directional, and that is what is so fascinating about this, is that you can really impact your gut through your brain, and you can impact your brain through your gut. So besides stress impacting your gut, I also want to mention that it can also elevate cortisol levels, which cortisol is a hormone. And again, cortisol has a lot of benefits for the body as well, but you don't want it to be chronic. When it's chronic, it can suppress ovulation. It can also lower progesterone levels. So that's one of the reasons why somebody can have lowered progesterone, is from high stress. And progesterone is really important. It's important for fertility, obviously, but it's really, really important for pregnancy. So in order to sustain a pregnancy, you need good, healthy amounts of progesterone. So I wanted to mention a couple of really interesting studies, and one of them was the study on Tibetan monks. And what they did was they actually looked at the gut microbiome of those Tibetan monks and also neighbors. And so basically what they found was that the microbiome of the meditators and the microbiome of the neighbors, and they both ate similar foods. They were exposed to the same water. They lived in the same area. The only difference really was that the meditators meditated all day. And what they found was that the gut microbiome in the meditators was a lot more enriched and a lot more diverse than the ones of the neighbors. And that's pretty fascinating, because what that shows you is that their types of microbiome and what it looked like for the meditators is associated with a lot less risk of inflammation and risk of heart disease and lots of different autoimmune conditions. So it protected them basically by having that enriched gut microbiome. It protected their bodies, but it also shows us that their meditations have something to do with the gut microbiome. Something else that I want to note is, if you've been listening to me, you probably are sick of hearing me talk about Dr. Joe Dispenza because I absolutely have been so influenced by his work. And when I went to his retreat, they basically studied the participants' blood, and their gut microbiome is one of the things that they study, in brain waves and amongst many other things. And what they found was that when they take the stool samples of the participants from the beginning, before they actually start the week-long meditation retreat, they check their stools before and then they check it afterwards, and they find that it's drastically different, and it has way more diversity in their microbiome, and it's associated with much better health. And so that's pretty fascinating, and that's something that I directly had experience to watching. So it seems like basically that through meditation and through mindfulness practices, or any kind of practices that lower stress, that can impact the gut microbiome, which is fascinating, because then it gives us a lot of power. It gives us a feeling of empowerment that you really can make a difference in your gut just through your mind alone. Another really fascinating study that I found was that they had seen correlations between certain types of mental disorders, and some of them were even mild depression or mild anxiety, all the way leading to bipolar and other types that were more severe. And what they found was that there was an interesting pattern of the microbiome, and it was a similar type of microbiome pattern where it showed some microbiome dysbiosis that related to the mental condition that the person had. So depending on what it was, there seemed to be a pattern in their gut microbiome, which is another incredibly fascinating thing. And something that I also heard about was fecal implants. I don't necessarily suggest it. I think it's still an experimental phase. Something that you might want to ask your doctor about if you really have gone through a lot, but definitely do your research, because I know that it's not something that, I think that it's not something without any risks at all. But what they found, which was fascinating about this, is that when they did the fecal transplant, the person would basically take a transplant of poop, it's kind of gross, from somebody who has a really good enriched microbiome. And they basically transplanted that poop from that person to the other person who would take the poop and put it back into the person who had dysbiosis or issues with their gut. And what they found was that it influenced their gut health, because what happened was that microbiome would start to populate and grow in numbers for the person that needed it. And they found that not only did it help in many cases with gut conditions, but it also helped with mental conditions. It helped with ADHD and many other types of mental diagnoses. So it was really, really, really fascinating that can really make such a difference, but it can. So it is kind of cool to know this, because then you realize that, yes, I can approach this through the gut itself, which a lot of people do. But many times people get so focused sort of on like the physical body that they ignore the mental body. And I find that I meet a lot of people, whether it's my clients or in person or online, where they have spoken to functional doctors. They know pretty much what supplements to take, what to eat, and they figured it all out, and almost to a point where it caused them a lot of mental stress. But the focus was so much just on the physical that the mental was ignored. And it is something that is easy to ignore because it's something that we don't really see, we can't touch. It's something that kind of operates behind the scenes. And most of the time, our eyes, when they're open, are focused on the world around us. So it's easier for us to focus on that and not close our eyes and go within, which is what a lot of these mindfulness practices teach us. And this is actually something that I cover a lot in my book, The Way of Fertility, because I thought it was so important. What I found just really in working in this field is that that is the most ignored aspect of our being. And it's because it can be actually really frustrating to deal with. It's frustrating to do something and work with something and focus on something that we can't really hold. And it's not as tangible. And it feels like we have less control. But ultimately, by doing so and allowing ourselves to experience that feeling, the feelings that come up with it, that's when we actually do start to feel more of a sense of control. So it's kind of like a little paradox in its own experience, but I do highly recommend looking into it. But I'm going to talk about not just the mindfulness aspect, but I'm also going to talk about really tangible ways that you can impact your nervous system. And of course, I'm going to mention acupuncture, and that is something that I do. And acupuncture is incredibly beneficial on regulating the nervous system. It works on your circuits, basically. I mean, to really say it in the most simplest way. Obviously, acupuncture is a lot more complex than just calling it circuits, but to say circuits, it makes it easier for the mind to really envision. So you basically have circuits in your body, and that circuits and the pulses that the circuits bring, which is really the channels inside your body, when you're stimulating that with acupuncture, it can really help regulate the nervous system and basically restart that. And so what that does is over time, and not in the beginning, sometimes in the beginning you can feel more tired, but over time it'll increase your energy, but also will help you feel calm at the same time. So I call it calm alert, and I love that combination when you're calm and you're alert, which is the opposite of like having a lot of coffee to try to like force yourself to have energy and then you're jittery. So no jitters, you're super alert, but you're also calm. It's like the perfect combination. So acupuncture can really support that in many different ways, not just by regulating your own patterns, but also by stimulating the channels and also by doing auriculotherapy, which is really addressing the points on the ears. The ears are one area that make the vagus nerve accessible. The vagus nerve, which is that go between your brain and your gut, is really, really important. When it gets stimulated, it actually stimulates the rest and digest part of your nervous system. So that could be really, really impactful on your gut health. And so one of the ways that you could do this, so acupuncture is one of the ways, but one of the ways that you could do this at home is simply by massaging your ears every single day. You could do this at night, and you could do this in the shower. You could do this whenever you remember to do it. But massaging your ears can almost immediately have an impact on the nervous system. So not almost immediately, it actually does have that. So that's something that you might want to do. And while you're doing that, you can also do some deep breathing. So working that diaphragm, so diaphragmatical breathing where we're breathing from the belly, that's ultimately the best way to breathe. We are trained over time and conditioned to breathe through the ribs. And while the ribs are part of how we breathe, the most effective way to breathe is through the diaphragm. So you can practice this by putting your hand on your belly and feeling your belly go in and out, and train yourself to do that. Get back into that, and you can actually train yourself to do that. I used to not do that, and I Now I train myself to do that. That is just the way I breathe. It's not going to give you a huge belly. You know, people are so afraid of that they start to breathe the wrong way. And ultimately, it helps oxygenate your body much better. But then also, when you're doing some breathing exercises, it can also calm the vagus nerve. One of the ways to do this is by inhaling to 4 counts, holding your breath, and then exhaling to 8 counts. So when you exhale longer than you inhale, you get yourself into a more rest and digest mode. If you have issues sleeping at night, this is a great exercise to do. And you could literally combine that with massaging your ears and also slowing down your breath and holding it on the inhale and holding it a little bit on the exhale. So controlling that breath and then filling up the lungs all the way and then exhaling all the air out. Another thing that you can do is hum. So humming, that vibration sound from your throat can actually impact and stimulate the vagus nerve. So that's another way to stimulate the vagus nerve. And generally speaking, things like yoga, qigong, and movement that becomes more conscious can also regulate your nervous system. And you can also, as you're laying down, if you have any issues falling asleep, you can also do something called yoga nidra. You can find many different ones on YouTube where they guide you through focusing on the different parts of your body, but becoming aware of your body sensations is another way to really make that strong connection between your brain and your awareness and your body. So that is really what I have for the mind. But then when it comes to your gut, you could do a lot of things too to support your mind and to support your gut. And so my number one rule for this, number one, is chew your food. Chew your food so that it becomes complete mush. And I remember hearing, when I was studying Ayurveda, I remember hearing my teacher share this quote, and I was like, oh my God, it's true. And he said, drink your food and eat your drink. So I'm like, okay, you know, it's kind of weird to hear the first time you hear about it, but drink your food, meaning you chew so well that you basically have a smoothie in your mouth ready to like swallow like a drink. And then also taking your time with the drinks and the soups and kind of giving yourself a little more time in your mouth, because what happens is your saliva has these amazing enzymes that help break down your food once it enters your gut. So that is the first process and probably the most important, because you want to start that foundation of digestion right. And that foundation starts with mastication, which is chewing, and combining that with your saliva. So not only liquefying it, but also liquefying it with liquid gold, which is digestive enzymes that you're able to really get into the food so that the food is able to process and the digestive system doesn't have as hard of a time doing what it does, because that the digestive process is actually very energy consuming. And that is one of the reasons why we need to rest and digest. We get more tired after we eat because our bodies need energy in order to digest. So when you're doing that, you're actually making it easier and creating a much more efficient digestive process. Secondly, if you're going to have proteins, combine them with vegetables or some fibers so that you're able to process it and really chew it. But also, the biggest, most difficult to digest meals should be eaten when the sun is strongest outside. What that does is that our bodies respond very much to the environment, and it will respond to that digestive fire. So having that sun very strong will impact our Agni, which is the digestive fire, and that will impact how we're able to process food. And I also suggest eating less at night. As the sun goes down, your digestive system also starts to sleep. So it's important during that time to go easy. And you can have soups, steamed vegetables, really, really light meals at night, and then allow your stomach and your digestive system a little fasting time in the evening before you go to sleep. Your sleep is going to be a lot better because, again, all that energy that usually goes into digestion can go into repair, into balancing hormones, into replenishing your body as you sleep. Plus, your sleep will be deeper and better if you don't have too much in your stomach. I also highly suggest getting on a good probiotic, and the one I like, and again, it really depends on your gut condition because you might need different protocols, but the company I like is Microbiome Labs, and they do gut testing. They have lots of different supplements. Megaspore Biotic is the most common one. For people with really complex digestive issues, they might benefit from going with something a little more gentle than Megaspore Biotic and doing like a one strain in the beginning so their body gets used to it. But I highly recommend their products because they are really, really top notch. And lastly, you could do this while you shower. You could do this after your shower. Massaging your belly is one of the most impactful things, not just for your gut, but it can also impact your uterus and get more blood flow to that area. So really just massaging in clockwise circles. So as you're looking at your belly, circle around your belly button, and you can do a wide circle until you get closer to the belly button and then go wide again and then go back and forth like that. Then you can go from the top of the rib cage down to the belly button, and then from your pubic bone up and from the sides towards the center of your belly button and diagonal as well. And really, you are intuitive and your hands are intuitive. So your hands will figure out how it feels good to massage your belly. So you can press in certain points that feel like it needs more movement, or if it feels stagnant, and you'll get to feel what you need, because that's ultimately what happens when we start to connect with our bodies. And lastly, just a really good habit to get into is mindful eating, becoming aware of what you're eating and not doing other things like watching TV or being on your phone, just sitting and looking at your food, because you do start salivating when you look at your food. Looking at your food is also the beginning of digestion. So becoming mindful with your food, also tasting your food, chewing your food, and becoming aware of how certain foods make you feel and really connecting with that, because that will connect you to intuitive eating, where you intuitively know what is good for you and what is not good for you. So that concludes today's episode, and I hope you enjoy this. To me, this is a really fascinating topic, and it's something that I think a lot of people should really give attention to, because the mind and the gut are really both important things when it comes to your fertility health. And it also will help the process so that you don't feel as stressed and you feel more ready and equipped to get through this, because we know the fertility journey is challenging as it is. So I hope you feel more empowered with this message. And if you guys feel connected to the content that I am sharing, please subscribe. And I would be so grateful for a review. Thank you so much for listening in, and I hope you have a beautiful day. So that concludes today's episode. You can find all of the links mentioned on the episode notes. If you're enjoying these episodes, please take a moment to share and leave a review. Reviews mean everything to podcasters, and I really enjoy hearing from my listeners. You can also find me on my website at www.thewholesomelotus.com or email me at info@thewholesomelotus.com. I love hearing from my listeners. If you're interested and want updates as well as a free ebook on my top 10 fertility boosting habits, you can visit my fertility page on www.thewholesomelotus.com. I thank you so much for listening in and hope that you have a beautiful day.